Alderneys Key FM.
It is 9:15 on Monday, April the 6th, and hopefully I've got President William Tate on the line. Good morning, William.
Good morning, Dougal, and good morning, everybody.
Nice to hear you. So you're going to start off with something that's not very nice, actually, is it?
It isn't. I mean, somebody up there is testing us, that's for sure. As I was preparing for this morning, I suddenly received an email and I had a number of phone calls from people saying that they had received emails on our alderneyspirit@outlook.com email address purporting to come from Gabrielle, asking people to buy Amazon vouchers for Gabrielle's niece. And also, I think, asking for phone numbers. Now, because on my email account, which is a state's email government account, I have additional levels of security, I was advised that these emails are a potential fraud or scam, and the message was blocked from my iPad because it matched the fraud and scam rules. So we know now, and it's confirmed, that this is a scam. So please, everybody that receives an email which purports to come from Gabrielle on the Alderney Spirit email, disregard it. It is a scam, and we are already investigating it, and hopefully we will be able to get to the bottom of it. But in fact, in the last 5 minutes, I've also had additional notifications of a scam on the alderney.news email address and also Vicarage on Alderney. So this is clearly a widespread initiative by some cynical person who is looking to interfere with the way in which we are dealing with the situation we find ourselves in. But that, I'm afraid, is the downside of technology, that there will always be people who seek to take advantage and to make profit for themselves at the expense of others, and shame on them.
Yeah, and sorry to interrupt you, William, but poor Gabrielle even got one to herself from herself, I believe.
Yes, she did. Yes, asking herself.
I know, there's some pretty sick people out there, I have to say.
Well, the problem is, we're all working really hard, and this sort of thing is a distraction. But thankfully, we've got the IT department at the Island Hall. We have the resources available in Guernsey. So Ian Hayward and his team are already on it, and they will be trying to get to the bottom of it as we speak. So I feel really confident that we've got the right people behind us there. But yeah, it's worrying and it's a distraction, but it will not affect our sense of purpose, and we will go on unabated. So So now perhaps I can go back to where I was going to start, unless you want to ask me anything at this stage.
No, yes, please. That would be nice.
Okay. Well, it seems to be the routine now that I start with the current statistics on COVID-19 infections. As of yesterday at 17:10, there were 154 positive tests for COVID-19 in the bailiwick, all of which are on the island of Guernsey. There are no positive test results in Alderney. Although, as I continue to stress, that doesn't mean we can be sure that the virus isn't here, but every day that passes without a positive test result is incredibly encouraging for all of us who are involved in this battle. Sadly, there have now been 3 deaths recorded in the bailiwick, the latest again being someone in their 80s. It's someone's parent, someone's family, someone's friend. It's one of our community, and we should never fall into the trap of simply getting used to seeing numbers on a screen to describe this tragedy. And I know that we will always think every one of those deaths, the implications are immense. And we have, I'm sure, a tremendous sense of compassion and support and understanding for what all the people who are affected by this virus are going through. The policy around testing in the bailiwick is beginning to pay dividends. There have been 1,109 people tested, which is very many more than in the UK on the basis of testing per head of population. The ability to be able to identify where the virus is and how it is spreading is vital to its containment. I also want to say that the bailiwick's transparency about the disease is commendable. 2 of the 3 deaths attributable to COVID-19 have not been deaths in hospital. In the UK, they would simply not appear in the figures. And you may have heard the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, say last night that the real number of deaths may well be significantly higher, because the UK government only record deaths in hospital. So those figures we wouldn't have been told about. So we would only have been told that there was 1 death. Tragic as it is better that we know the full picture. And I'm sure the community are extremely grateful for the way in which this is being handled in Guernsey. So what we're doing in the bailiwick is what so many people are crying out for in the UK, which is a method of testing which is far more directed and gives a much better idea of where the virus is, where it's spreading, and then it gives you the options of how to deal with it. So we may be a small jurisdiction, but that's not to say that we can't lead the way. The strategy about social distancing, the restrictions on movement, the rigorous approach to testing, and the requirement to self-isolate represent a potent and determined effort. And we hope that it means that Guernsey will contain the spread so that it doesn't become self-seeding within the community. And anyone who saw the Health Secretary over the weekend continuing to put out the same message that the way to beat this virus is social distancing, so that the virus does not get the opportunity to hop from one person to another. And that's the essential message that's being put into the community, and I have to say, to a very large extent, is being respected. Although I will say something a little later about that. This week, the restrictions which were introduced in the bailiwick almost a fortnight ago will come under review. The situation in Guernsey indicates that we are unlikely to be in a position to see those restrictions lifted for some time to come. However, the longer we go without a confirmed case in Alderney, the more our situation begins to diverge from theirs. We are very aware of this, and we have been working hard behind the scenes to look at ways we might be able to make things work better for Alderney. So in the operational group on Friday, there was a discussion about these issues and the different perspectives played into that. And as a result of that, all the views were coordinated this weekend by Andrew Mutter, and he was able to put together a very impressive document which sets out how we see some relaxation of being to the benefit of the island. Because what we're saying is that we are going to need to have some local discretion to make things work effectively in Alderney. And at present, the emergency response is necessarily a very centralised response in Guernsey. So what does that mean? It means that in a crisis, decisions are made which will affect everybody, but may well affect people in different ways. So we are bound by the legislation and the guidance we receive from Guernsey. But what we are saying is we are a small community of 2,000 people, not 60,000 people. We have a very different way of life, and that way of life needs to be respected. And where the arrangements don't work for us, then we need to be able to tweak them so that we can maintain as much of our normal life as we can. So, for example, our essential retailers providing us with food and medicines can do so with home delivery systems. So our case is, well, why shouldn't we see if other retailers could do the same? Because we're all spending time at home. No doubt those of us who are lucky enough to have gardens are spending time in them, but there will be things that it would be much better if we had access to, so that we could do our potting and planting. So those are the sorts of things that we think could really give us a positive lift and really help to make spending time at home a bit more manageable. And again, our restaurants were moving towards delivered takeaways when the lockdown came. We should see if we can get that resumed. And it's the little implications. For example, because restaurant takeaways are no longer available, then a number of our elderly residents are now having to rely on Meals on Wheels. Now that has a consequence because there is only so much resilience within the Meals on Wheels system. So we're now approaching the limit, and we are going to have to look at alternative ways of providing more food, which will require more volunteers. So for us, the impact is really important. It may not be such a problem in Guernsey, but for us, it is. So what we're saying is, look, please give us the ability to tailor the guidance around our specific needs. And I know from the phone calls and from the emails I've received how much people relied on the takeaways in order that they didn't have to cook all the time, or they may find cooking difficult. So I think that's a really good example. And the other one, which I have to say, personally, I struggle with, because for somebody who exercise is a daily part of my life, I know how important it is and how much more important it is at a time like this. So I'm conscious that some people think they should be able to use their 2-hour period of exercise differently, going fishing, going for a drive around the island. As long as this remains safe and people maintain social distance, why shouldn't that be permitted? And it's not just physical exercise, and I think we have to emphasize this. It's about people's mental well-being. And Gabrielle and I have studied and practiced yoga here and all over the world in the last 25 years. So meditation is very important because it aids people's sense of mental well-being. So if you want to drive round the island, and if that gives you a real sense of feeling good, then for my money, that is just as important as walking or cycling. And we mustn't forget that, because this will be a bigger issue ongoing. So anything that promotes people to feel a sense of well-being is something that we should be pursued. So that's also a case which I think can properly be put to Guernsey. There are always difficult decisions, but we think that some local discretion in Alderney to suit Alderney's circumstances is desirable. And as a lawyer, I know from my studies that in order for laws to be enforceable, it requires the consent of the public. And where you have laws which people cannot understand the logic, then it makes it much more difficult for law enforcement to make sure people abide by them. And I just get the sense that some of the restrictions and the way in which they impinge upon our liberty may well be reaching a point where that relationship between the public and the government is being stretched. And that puts our law enforcement in a very difficult position because we have very limited resources. So we can't police everybody. So it's that contract between government and community which is fundamental in any democracy. So whilst it may be that people find it difficult to understand, and it may well be that we would share that difficulty until such time as we can effect change, then we all have a responsibility to live by the existing rules. Because to do other than that risks breaking the community. And that is the one fundamental which will keep us focused throughout the crisis and the difficulties to come. So I take no pleasure at all in having to say to people, you can't do certain things. But that's the law. We all respect the law. And thankfully, we live in a democracy where the contract between the people and the government is a two-way street. So I'm pleased to say that the document that was prepared yesterday by Andrew Mutter was forwarded to the Policy and Finance Committee, and a majority of that committee agreed with the content, and therefore it was agreed that James Dent, the chairman of Policy and Finance and our voice on the Civil Contingencies Authority, should make representations to the Committee for Health and Social Care and the Civil Contingencies Authority to provide for that local discretion in Alderney. So that meeting is taking place, I think, today. So he will put our case. He is supported in that by a very comprehensive, logical, properly argued piece of work that Andrew has prepared in consultation with the politicians and all our frontline services. So that's the best case we can put forward. Now, there's no guarantee of success. And if we fail at this hurdle, we will not stop. We will continue to make that case, because the longer we can remain virus-free, the more divergent we become from the rest of the bailiwick. So please, fingers crossed, we will be able to get some sort of discretion. But if we don't, it will not be for the want of trying. But we've also had to concede, and I'm sure that the whole community would agree with this, that it would be on the strict understanding that if we do have a confirmed positive case, we may then have to revert to the previous approach. So really, wait and see, fingers crossed, and hopefully we can make life a little more comfortable in the short term. Now, just one or two shouts outs, if I might, because again, I just want to re-emphasise the work that Liz Bowskill is doing at the Connaught. She really is at the sharp end, and she is taking every precaution available to ensure the safety of the residents and also the safety of her staff. And again, I have massive admiration for her and her team in the way in which they have calmly, and professionally managed what is, for all of us, a focal point of our community, because these are all our most respected members of the community, and we all know the responsibility that that brings with it. And also, can I just give a shout out to the police, because I've already said it's not easy trying to enforce these regulations. But what James said to me on Saturday was that he felt he'd built up a really good relationship with the community here, where we were having policing by consent, and people understood why he did what he did, and the public bought into it. And I think it would be massively sad if that was to be in any way threatened by the circumstances in which we find ourselves. So please have respect for our enforcement officers. Don't make their job any more difficult. And again, they will support you, and you need to support them. We've got a slight issue again, I'm told, around teenagers. Apparently some were out at Windy Corner at midnight on Saturday. Others out last night. There was an incident, I think, last night involving some youngsters. I may be wrong about this, but my understanding was jumping into the sea. Well, again, look at that. If that's true, then they're not just putting their lives at risk, but it's all the impact on that. Possible hospital, possibly going to Guernsey. So parents must know where their teenagers are. So I know how hard it is. We all know how hard it is with teenagers. However, these are different times. And please, parents, do everything you can to make sure that your youngsters recognize how serious this is and recognize how damaging it can be both to them, to their families, and to the wider community. So, we're doing brilliantly well. I think that very few places can say that they have had such a consistent response to all our requests, but there are always going to be little pockets where we can do better. So it's just keep up the good work. Parents, try and keep your children indoors, and we'll get through this. One final thing on a lighter note, if I may, Dougal. I was very sad to see that Mick Barnes has finally decided to hang up his boots. He has been holding his own one-man recycling, certainly for as long as we've lived on the island. And as I sit in my dining room now, apart from my dining room table, everything else came from Mick Barnes, including a massive gong, which originally came from a hotel in India. So I think his contribution to our community over the years should be recognised. It was always a place to call in on Saturday morning and chew the fat and have a look. He would always buy things back. So he really was, in my view, a real representation of what a true community should be. And I think all of us will wish him a very, very happy retirement. And I think just to recognise people make contributions in all sorts of different ways. But this island would have been the worst had he not kept a smile on all our faces in so many different ways. And if we didn't always feel at the end of the day we'd got a fair deal. So thank you, Mick, on behalf of all of us. And I think on that note, Dougal, that is what I've got for you this morning.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And I certainly think that the good weather is helping us all as well. And some lovely stories going around. And I must say, on Thursday, there was the round of applause for NHS and all the emergency services and important services on the island. And I put my head out the door and started clapping, and there was cheers and whistles and drums banging and all sorts. So it's all going very well on that front, William.
Of course it is. And yes, we all support all our essential services, because these are the people, and we've seen the consequences, tragic consequences now of frontline health workers in the UK losing their lives. So that's the commitment that these people are making to keep us safe. And anything we can do to just give them that extra bit of thanks, you won't believe how important that is. So thank you, everybody, for just making a gesture of solidarity, of support, and, you know, I'm sorry I keep saying it, it's just what this community is about.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, William, and we'll speak to you around the same time again tomorrow morning.
When things might be slightly less frantic. Well, thank you, Dougal, and thanks everybody for listening.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much, William Tate, our President.
Thanks. Bye.
Alderneys Key FM.